Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this week's Learning Collective sessions. We've got a great day planned today with much of the focus on instructional design and instructional designers, and then we've got a great session with JD Dillon a little later on AI for L&D, or getting started with AI for L&D. But this morning, I am so happy to have Sarah Mercier, and did I pronounce that right?
I think it was very close. We both have last names that everybody messes up now, right?
Right. And, all those years of French at college, kind of sort of helped me. But,
right,
but Sarah is a friend of Risk and collaborator, partner, and I'm really excited that you were able to be on today and share with us your experience and your insight on storyboarding and design content. And I know that many people most likely already know you, and you probably need no introduction, but I am going to share a little bit about you before we get started here. So Sarah is the CEO at Learning Ninjas and specializes in innovative learning technology and strategic implementation of learning solutions. She's also the founder of Me Learning Solutions and a national facilitator for the Association for Talent Development, ATD, as we all know them. ATD's Master eLearning Instructional Designer. Her innovative learning solutions have been recognized by winning industry awards such as Best of Show at Focus on Learning, Demo Fest for XAPI for interactive ebooks. I think that's one that we won.
That is, yes, right? That's actually one that we did in partnership with Risk.
Exciting, and I still have those photos. I'll have to share them again. And Best Performance Support Solution at DevLearn Demo Fest for Critical Success Factors Training and Assessment Tool. Sarah is a frequent speaker at industry conferences and business events in the areas of instructional strategy, learning technology strategy, and learning solution design and development. Her work has been published in ATD's 2020 Trends in Learning Technology, the Book of Road Tested Activities, TD Magazine, Learning Solutions Magazine, CLO Magazine, and a variety of other training and workforce publications. So your work is not going to be hard to find if anybody is looking for any of your previous publications. It's a simple matter of Google.
So you got to get the last name right, though, because it was previously Gilbert. So it may come up under that.
You are correct. Yes, it was. So look for Sarah Gilbert or currently Sarah Mercier. Good morning, Duncan. He is joining us on the stream. And good morning again to everyone who's joining us. Feel free to pop in with comments or questions below there, and we'll get to questions towards the end of Sarah's presentation. And without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and bring up your presentation and let you get started.
Okay. So that was quite the lengthy introduction. I think it's worthwhile to say, though, that the 2020 Learning Technology Trends book that you'd mentioned, Anne, is one that JD also contributed to as well. And he's going to be presenting for you all later today. So definitely check that out. I am happy to be here. You get to get a little piece of my home this morning. And so this is where the magic happens right now. It's at home. So if you get to see my cat, Ginger, walking by, then that's going to be something to watch for. You never know what's going to happen. One of my kids may come down the stairs without a shirt on. We have no idea. But I'm going to be sharing with you all today some of the process that we use at Learning Ninjas. And that is around storyboarding in a process that makes more sense for the way that we design today for multiple screens, because we don't know whether someone, in many cases, we don't know whether someone is going to be accessing our content on a desktop or a mobile device. And so whether it is on a phone, a smartphone, a tablet, all of these different screens, or a widescreen monitor, we don't know where people may be accessing our information. So today's session is going to be about how do we tweak our design process so that we can accommodate that as part of our initial design instead of after the fact. I told you that Ginger would make an appearance in the background. So let's get started. And I will actually, Anne, if you can see this okay, I may just leave it like this rather than, I'll hit presenter mode.
So it looks fine, and it's entirely up to you.
Yeah. So what we'll do, we'll leave it so that way I can still see what's going on and see you all in the chat if anyone drops in there. Okay, so what we'll do is we'll get started with some information for how to contact me. So if you're interested later in reaching out to me, you can get me on Twitter. And here is access to our my email address as well as our website. And the website actually just recently relaunched. So there's some really good information out there for you and some free resources as well. So I want to start with your current design process. If you would like to drop into the chat, what is your current design process? What are some of the things you do when you're designing a new e-learning project? So what are some of the things that we would typically do when we're designing a new e-learning project? And you can type those in the live chat. Recognizing that many of you are probably going to be joining us later on this screen recording, so I'll do a recap. Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things we need to do is pull together all of our content. And that generally is a process of meeting with our lovely stakeholders and subject matter experts. Yes, identifying our learning objectives, and hopefully in a performance-based structure, because we want to be able to measure what people can do with the information that we teach them, not just that they've seen it. Absolutely. And yes, our goals for our learning, exactly. And when we're going through this design process, some of those pieces are going to contribute to what is probably the most common design deliverable in our industry, and that is a storyboard. And so our storyboard usually ends up being something that we pull together. It's sort of a draft of our online learning solution, of our e-learning. And people often do it in something like PowerPoint or Word. So let's share some examples of storyboards. And I'm going to start off with a couple of examples that are ours at Learning Ninjas, ones that I've worked on and those on my team have worked on, and a few different tools. The first one that you see here is a screenshot of a storyboard for an organization that we work with called Leave No Trace. And this organization is one of our give back projects. So this is one of our pro bono projects. And Leave No Trace is an organization that works with individuals to help them identify ways that they can have less negative environmental impact when they're enjoying the outdoors. And so when you go camping, packing things out, what are some of the ways that we can preserve our natural resources? And so we've been going through this storyboard with them, and this project is actually about to be released. So check out Leave No Trace's website later, and that should be coming out fairly soon. I would say probably within the next month. But you can see here that we've just done this in PowerPoint. There's nothing particularly special about this other than I do have to give props to the Articulate community, because this was a course that we were building in Rise, and this storyboard layout is for Rise. It's a Rise templated storyboard. And so we went through this process of storyboarding the project out with Leave No Trace. And you can see that there are places for visuals, there are places for our interaction, and then anything that is going to be content related on the screen. And then also you have things like file names for images. So we see this as one place to pull everything together. So this is what I would consider to be a final design deliverable before building out your content. This is your blueprint, if you will. This next example is for a project that we're doing with University of Tennessee. And it's to help police officers learn about de-escalation when they are called to a scene where there's potentially a veteran that's suffering from PTSD. And so it's how to recognize some of those PTSD indicators and then de-escalate so that they don't have to use active force. And so in this example, you'll notice that we built this one in Microsoft Word, and it's just in a table. One of the things that I will mention is that as an organization, Learning Ninjas, we generally work in lots of different formats because we work in the storyboard format that the client is used to. So for this one, they were used to seeing these storyboards in Word. Now we made some adjustments to it and some recommendations to the existing template, but you can see similar to what we just saw in the PowerPoint example, you still have your visuals. Here we have an SME, their name, and we also have how are we describing the screen graphic? Because for this one, it's going to be important when we hand it off to someone to illustrate that they are able to see where we're trying to get. And I just sketched this up on my iPad and dropped these images in. So you can see that I sketched that up and then put the content there on the right. So just another example, this one in Word. The next example you'll see here is for a client that we have up in Michigan called Sage Metro Detroit. And they're an organization that works with the aging LGBT community. They work with providers to help them better serve the older community of LGBT in the area. And we put together this series of courses with them to help healthcare providers be more inclusive in their services that they provide. So whether it's an intake form or a phone call or their voicemail messages, to teach them how to help teach healthcare providers how to be more inclusive. Again, the storyboard is very similar to the other formats. This one we built in Google Slides. And so same type of information, just a slightly different layout. But for each of these, you can see that they are very rough mock-ups. They're not going to be a finished product. This is one example that we received from Connie Malamed, who is a really well-known instructional designer in our field. And this is one that she was building out for HIPAA in Storyline. So this is another storyboard. She put this into PowerPoint. But again, you can see that we're looking at the layout. What is our visual? What's our content? How are we pulling all of this together? And one last example, this is from Megan Torrance with Torrance Learning. And she provided this example because this is a mobile based storyboard, so you can see the mobile layouts, but she just built this into PowerPoint as well. You can see that she has the visuals on the screen, and this is really kind of wireframed out, and you'll see what that means in a minute. But she's combined a storyboard with mockups and wireframing, and at the bottom she's got her content in the notes section, which is probably a layout that many of you are familiar with if you create storyboards. So in the chat, tell us what is the most common feedback. If you've created storyboards and you share that storyboard with your subject matter experts or your stakeholders, what is the most common feedback that we generally get from our storyboards? What do we normally see them say to us? There's one that I've consistently gotten over the years, no matter what organization that I was working with or in, no matter who I was working with, I would get this feedback from storyboard reviewers. Yes, Duncan, absolutely. That is the number one piece of feedback. Now, of course, we get lots of different feedback on our storyboards. And hopefully, once your subject matter experts are used to working with you a little more, then you will generally end up getting more quality feedback. But one of the biggest issues that we have is that, yes, exactly, it's not a finished product. Thanks for stealing my thunder, Duncan. It's not a finished product. So they don't understand what is this actually going to look like. We know because we're used to building these and we know how we're structuring it and what that's going to end up in. But when you send a PowerPoint over to someone that has this format of information, especially if you look at an example like this, it's sort of difficult for them to interpret what it is you're trying to do here. So I'm going to propose today that we make some adjustments to what we currently do in storyboarding. Now, we still do storyboards at Learning Ninjas. We create storyboards for every project. Now, I have been in this field my entire career, and I still build a storyboard for every single project, even if it's in Rise, even if it's a simple micro-learning. I storyboard it out, even if it's just on one little page. I'll structure out what is it that I'm going to put together here. So it's very important that you do a storyboard, but I'm going to recommend that we make some adjustments to how we design these deliverables when we're sending them to people for review and pulling all of this together. So what I recommend here is that we look at 5 steps to storyboarding, to ending up in our storyboard. One is going to be a content outline. And that's something you probably all are doing now. And that's pulling together all your content. As you see in the chat, it was mentioned earlier, we need to pull together our content first, and we'll outline that. And everyone has built outlines since we were kids in school. So all we mean by outline is what you already know an outline to be. Putting together what are all your topic areas, your headings, do you have any subheadings or sections, and all your content. This is also a really good opportunity to look at it from a technical writing perspective or writing for an instructional delivery, thinking about writing in first person, using direct speech, cutting back any extraneous language. See, I just used $1 million word to talk about cutting back your language, but also checking it to see what grade level you're writing on. So this is a really good opportunity, this first one, to just focus only on content. The second is looking at mapping that content. Now, this is all about taking those topic areas and putting a structure to it. So whether you have a linear course, like maybe it's a step-by-step course, and so you want to go through it in a certain path, or maybe it's branched, meaning you can go down different paths or you can pop in at different points based on what you need. But no matter what that looks like, we want to structure that out. We want to create a content map to structure that out so that we can see, does this look right, organized in this way? The reason why I create the content map is because it's a visualization of my outline and it's a lot easier to work with and organize. So content outline is for content. Content map is for structure of your content. Third, we have sketches and wireframes. And we'll get into that in just a minute. But how do we sketch out the visuals? So number 3 is all about your visual and flow. So we've mapped this content out. We know the structure of it. So now how do they actually flow through the pieces of that content? And then what are they seeing at each stage of the process? Fourth is your mood board. Mood board is the thing that everybody loves to work on, and that is what is your visual identity for your course. So this is where people get to look at colors and image styles, font types, all of that stuff that people want to make decisions on. They don't want to read your content. They want to say, ooh, this color is pretty or it's not, or I like this image or not. So that tends to be a fun deliverable to work on. And then finally, our prototype. This is pulling this all together in a format that is easy for your customer, your stakeholder, your SME to provide you feedback. So your prototype gives them the ability to see that information all pulled together in a way that is not developing it out yet. And I'm going to show you a tool that makes that very easy today. So we talked about first, finding all of the content. So our content map comes first, and I'll show you some examples. The purpose of a content map is just, again, to outline the content that directly supports our learning objectives. So along the lines of what was mentioned, I believe Duncan mentioned in the chat earlier, you have to identify what your learning objectives are. And I believe Diane Elkins had added this to a course. For some reason, her name is what I'm attributing this to. It could have been someone else, just as a disclaimer. But the comment was, there's no reason for anyone to know anything if they're not going to do something with that information. Again, we don't want to teach someone anything if they're not going to do something with that information. And that's where we want to get to when we're in our content outline phase. We have to determine what is it that we actually want them to learn. That's how it helps us scope our project. And then what are they going to do with it? Because that's how we determine how we'll measure it, right? So that's our content outline phase. Let me show you some examples of ours. So this is the content outline, or a screenshot of it for the Leave No Trace course that I showed you a moment ago, the storyboard for that one. This was the content outline, and that's where we started with this client. We built out this content outline, and it was basically them pulling all of their content into, this is just a Google Doc because we collaborated on this. And I do like to use Google Docs with content outlines because you can collaborate and comment. I do know that Microsoft has some of these tools now with, I guess it's OneDrive and that kind of thing. I do like this, for any kind of collaborative format for this stage is really helpful. And you can see it's just a format of, or it's just a practice or activity of dumping all of our content in there and then making adjustments to it. So you can see where we've crossed things out. We worked quite a bit on learning objectives to turn them into performance-based learning objectives here. We restructured some things, retitled some things. So this was all of our collaborative work on working through the content itself. The second example you see here is for the University of Tennessee de-escalation project for the police officers. And so this is, again, just in a Google Doc. You can see they've got topics. I do like to use headings and subheadings in my content map because that makes it very easy for me later, once we've worked through this, to pull those out and turn them into my content map. So I'll show you that in just a moment, where that pulls from. So again, just a content outline, nothing too magical here, but collaboration is key. The second step here is the content map. Again, this is a visual representation of the organization and flow of our design just through the topics. So it's a way for us to organize or map out our content topic areas. Let's see a couple of examples. This one is your example of the University of Tennessee project for the police officers, so de-escalation tactics. And you can see we've organized this into 2 modules with some resources. The tool that I've used here is called MindMeister, but you could use PowerPoint to do this. I like MindMeister because 1, they have a free account, and 2, you can very easily move things around. But I mean, if you have something like Visio or anything that you can diagram in, I think MindJet is another one that I've used in the past. Anything that lets you quickly map is a really good tool for this. And I'll share with you that for this particular project for University of Tennessee, this actually started out as 4 modules. And the topic areas were completely shifted around. So as we continued to work through the structure of it, we made so many adjustments that we said, you know what, this really makes sense to have 2 modules. 1 is our foundational content, which is the knowledge that they need, to then build into 2, which is how do I apply what I've learned. And so it was a really interesting process to go through and reorganize this in a tool that's very easy to use. Here is a second example. This is the one for Leave No Trace that I shared earlier. And you can see this is just 1 module. And you've got introduction, visitor created impacts, and so forth. Now, this one ended up getting built out in Rise. And when you look at this structure, you can see why that makes a lot of sense, because it really is topic areas that I could jump in at any point. This is not linear, right? Whereas here, when I go into these, I've got introduction, veterans, and so forth, 1, 2, 3, 4. There's an order to it that makes sense. And so here, there's no particular order. It's just information that you can learn. And so we were able to use mapping also as a way to help push us toward making a decision on what development tool we'll use. Let's take a look at sketches and wireframes. Now, as I mentioned earlier, sketches are going to be our way to kind of demonstrate what our visuals should be. And wireframes is a way to connect each screen in our solution, whatever it is we're building. It connects each screen together. So when I click on something on that screen, is it taking me out to a link? Is it taking me to another screen? And so it all connects. Let's look at some examples here. First of all, one of my favorite things to use if I'm going to sketch it out on paper is dot grid paper. And that is because these little dots, first of all, they're not too dark, so it's not like using lined paper, but it also lets me have the ability to draw a little more consistently, use appropriate spacing. Because if you are not using dot grid paper, I don't know about you guys, but I'm not great at drawing without some kind of context on a piece of paper. So if I were to use just a blank sheet of paper from screen 1 to screen 2, things would be kind of shifted. So for consistency, dot grid paper helps. You could just print out a white plain paper with dots on it. It would work the same way, but there are dot grid notebooks. Second thing and this is the one I actually use most frequently, is going to be something that I can erase. And that usually comes in the format of either a whiteboard or my iPad, because I do have an iPad Pro, and I use an application called Paper that helps me, and I'll share that app with you in a minute, that helps me do that. But this is an example. This is my whiteboard that I use. The thing I like about this whiteboard, this is just one of those whiteboards that you put in a locker in school. So they're not expensive, they're very cheap. But this whiteboard, I can sketch things out in landscape or in portrait from a smartphone view. And because it's small, I can do this, and it's very, tactile. So I can sketch out a screen on it and then snap a picture of it with my phone and then erase whatever pieces need to change for the next screen. So that's a really nice way to sketch things out if you don't want to draw and erase on paper. And here's an example of what that might look like, just sketching some things out. So if I'm sketching something, this is an example of an orientation performance support application, just a made-up one, right? And when you come into an organization as a new hire, in orientation, usually you have some welcome information, maybe some policy and procedures that you need to learn, and some forms you have to fill out. So this is just a quick sketch up of what an orientation performance support application might look like. So just a quick example there of sketching. Now, I mentioned that I typically will use my iPad. This is the application that I use for sketching on my iPad. Now, the thing that I like about this is that, again, it's very tactile, so I can actually draw it out. And then what I'll do is I'll export those images as PNGs, and I'll drop those into my storyboard later once I pull everything together. But it gives me a really easy way to sketch things up. And again, I'm not some kind of artist or anything. I mean, I enjoy drawing and coloring and that kind of thing, but it's not, it does not have to be perfect. It just has to demonstrate what it is you are trying to convey. And what I do with this is all of those images that I'll sketch up, I'll then hand those off either to a visual designer or graphic designer, someone that can create those images for me, Or I use that as a basis for going and looking for whether it's stock photos or taking my own pictures in an organization of real products or people. So it just kind of depends on what it is I'm doing. But this is a good way to quickly sketch up what you're thinking rather than having to spend hours going out to, one of the stock photo sites and pulling sample images, which I think ends up really just confusing people unless you know it's an image that you want to use. This is an example of an application that I sketched up. I did this for Adobe, I don't know, years ago, back when mobile learning really first started becoming a thing. Now it's just kind of assumed that people might get on a mobile device and use your content. But I was at an Adobe event and doing a presentation on how to use Captivate to develop a mobile learning performance support app. So I built an application to teach people about the different hotels on the Las Vegas Strip because we were in Vegas for that event. But you can see here, this is using the paper app that I showed you a moment ago. You can see that this sketch, this is not anything super special, but it let me show the layout that I intended for the application. And I know that it's sideways here, just for the sake of the presentation, but you can see that the boxes with X's, that just is a placeholder for an image. The lines are placeholders for text. So what I'm saying on each of these is that I want an image here, I want some text here, I've got a back button, these are the different menu items. Now it ended up looking quite different once we got to the prototyping phase. We ended up making a lot of adjustments, but this helped me start to think through how was I going to design it and pull all of that into my prototype to check it. This is a free resource that I do like to share in any of my design sessions where I'm talking about this process. There is a site called sneakpeekit.com, and they have free downloadable templates for you to sketch out to create your sketches or your wireframes for your projects. What I like about this is that you can download it as a PDF. You could use it as an image background, but it has free templates for desktop, tablet, and mobile phone. And I'll show you how I used them. So I actually used these templates and downloaded them when I was creating my sketches and wireframes for the Critical Success Factors project, which is one that Anne mentioned during the introduction. That's one that we worked on. Sean Putman and I worked on it together. It's a training and assessment tool it was for teaching people about informatics projects, which is basically information technology type projects in public health. And one of the other things I'll mention about that is the folks at Risk actually helped us add CMI5 to that so we could run it through an LMS and get XAPI statements. But we won't get into that because that's maybe a little more technical than what we're talking about today. But this is the design for that. And I used the Sneak Peek It template. And what I did is I pulled that template down and I used it as a background image, and then I typed on top of it. So I added boxes and text on top of the template so I could see all of my screen layouts for that project. Now, what you don't see probably very well here, because this is a relatively small image. Let me see if we'll expand it. This is another reason why it's good not to be in presentation mode, right? I can play with it real time. So let's see if I can pull up one of these screens. You can see here that, notice how it's got labels, A, B, C, D, and then each of those are buttons. And at the bottom, that text that you see underneath it is what each of those buttons does. So what I have done here is I've used a SketchUp or a mock-up of my screens in my course, or my solution as it is, and then I actually mapped or wireframed out what each screen should do. So wireframing actually comes from web design. It is essentially at a very high level just a way for us to convey how screens are connected throughout our whatever it is we're developing, whether it's e-learning, a mobile app, whatever that is. So wireframes are the ability to demonstrate how things are connected. And it helps us when we're creating the prototype so that we can see, how does this map together? What connects to what? Is this linking out to something? So for this particular example we see here, A, which was a section, was actually jumping out to a different screen. And so in the text, which you can't see here because it's very small, you've got that screen or that button jumping out to a screen, and it lets me see where that maps to. This is a very valuable tool for your developer because it helps them see how they should set up let's say you're working in a rapid development tool like Captivate or Storyline. It lets you say what slide you're jumping to, right? If it's something that is maybe app development or web development, and you're creating something that is more like an HTML5 based web product, you're going to have the ability to say, okay, this should launch this JavaScript, or this should hyperlink to this, or this should launch the phone dialer on their phone and input in this number. It should launch their email application and put in this email address. And so all of these things allow us to communicate what it is we intend for our project to do on each screen. And we do this in storyboards now, but because we're trying to put all of these previous steps in one place, that is why, if we go back to earlier when I asked you about the type of feedback you get from folks, it's because we're trying to ask them to give us feedback on a lot of different things all at once, instead of breaking those out and saying, just give me feedback on design element, the visual design elements, just give me feedback on content. Only give me feedback on the layout, like the structure and how everything connects. And honestly, the structure piece, I don't always give that to SMEs. I'll give this to my developer or someone else that I'm collaborating with to check and make sure that I haven't missed any kinds of links or anything, or missed any buttons. One of the things that I identify most often is that, oh, I forgot to put a button on this page to get back to the main screen, or I forgot to put a menu, or whatever that might look like. So this is something that is extremely important for customized projects or any e-learning that has branching. It's a step that I would not skip for that process. This is a very important step, but at a very bare minimum in this step, we want to at least do our sketch. We want to at least do our sketches, and then some way to communicate how those screens should act and what should happen on each screen. I'll give you just another tool that you can use for creating these mock-ups. You'll hear them called mock-ups or sketch-ups. It's the same thing. It's just mocking up a screen. This is a tool called MockFlow. I've used this before to do more technical projects. So if you're doing anything that is actually creating an application that would be in an app store, or you're building something, let's say in Drupal or Moodle, there are a bunch of layouts that they have in this tool, and you select the layout. So you would say, I want to create a design for an iPhone or for an Android device or for desktop, and it's going to be a Drupal project, right? So they have lots of different layouts where you can actually pick icons from the UI for that tool, the user interface for that tool, and drop them onto the screen. So the example you see here is a version of iPhone, right? And so I can take this iPhone template and I can actually drop what the actual icons would be onto my mockup rather than just sketching it out on paper. So it's another way that you can do that. That is maybe a more high fidelity version of mockup. The other nice thing about MockFlow is that you can also use those mockups and you can turn them into a prototype that you can share within the same tool. Now, we talked about mood boards. This is the fun one. Our mood boards, they're just the images, any materials, any pieces of text, anything that is intended to evoke a project style or concept. This is the visual identity for your course. Now, I often will have people tell me, well, I have to follow my corporate branding, which we've all experienced probably at some point in our career if we've been in this industry at any period of time. I've worked with organizations that were super brand sensitive, and I've worked with others that didn't care what color you used of anything. One of the things that I will often do is I'll ask for our client's style guide, right? Many of you probably have those from your marketing department or something. What is your style guide? So here's what our logo is. Here's how it should be used. Here's our color palette with all the hex codes, right? And then what I'll do is take those colors and I'll create a color palette that is a corresponding palette. And I use a tool that I actually don't have in the presentation today, but I use a tool called Adobe Color. It used to be called Cooler, but it's just Adobe Color. And that's a free tool that you can use to create color palettes. So that's something that you might be interested in, whether you have an Adobe tool set or not. So let's take a look at some examples of mood boards. Now, this is one that I just pulled as an example, where you can see the things that you incorporate into a mood board are going to be color. If you're using any kind of imagery, you want to put, is it real images? Is it, illustrated images, or, like the cartoonish style of visual identity? So iconography, are we using really heavy icons? Are we using, thin light? Are we doing drop shadows, or are we using flat design? So all of those things are illustrated here in our mood board. And here is a very simple example. And this template, again, I'm pretty sure that this template may have come from I think it was from Diane Elkins, but it's a very simple mood board template. All this is it's a PowerPoint slide with a table on it. And what I like about this, and why I keep using this format, now I've modified it quite a bit from the original, but it's like overall, it's the same structure. So you've got fonts and colors at the top. So I said, okay, I want all my headings to be in this font type and this size. Any of my accents will be this font type and this size. And I actually make it the font and color or whatever that I'm saying it is, so I can see it and play with it. And then I'll drop in my color palette. This is actually a color palette that I pulled from Adobe Color. So really great tool to use. And it gives me all of the hex codes. So these are the colors that I would use in this course identity. Logos that they asked me to use, whether it's the client. So let's say you work for a company that requires that you put logos in your course. Maybe it's for an external audience. You would drop the logos in here. The icon style that you're going to use. A really good tool for icons is the Noun Project. And the Noun Project gives, we have a subscription to it at Learning Ninjas because there are just infinite uses of it, but it allows you to pull up any kind of icon. There are icons for anything you can imagine. It's amazing. But you can download them as a vector image or as a PNG, and you can actually, even now, you can change the color before you download it. So you could, change it, add that hex code before you even download it. So we use the Noun Project to pull icon sets. And then you have character style. So for us, the characters were going to be real images because this is a very serious project and we wanted the police officers to be able to relate to their peers and to the content. So we have real characters. We're actually going to film this. Once we get out of Corona times, we're going to go out to Knoxville and go film the content and take pictures of real police officers that we're using in our course. And then our image style. So real characters and our image style it's kind of a dark but hopeful look is what we were going for. Now, for this mood board, one thing that's important to note is that we actually create 2 to 3 mood boards versions. So if you can picture this page with 3 of them with different styles, so different color palettes, different imagery, we pick 3. Now, a pro tip, make sure that you pick 3 and that you like all 3 of them. So that way, no matter which one they pick, you will be happy. I've heard people say, oh, give them two options, pick one that is obviously bad and pick one that you really love. And so that way they won't pick the obviously bad one. Yes, they will. They will pick the bad one and then you'll be stuck with it. So always present more than one, but present more than one that you can buy into is my recommendation. What I have found in working through these projects is that typically my SMEs on these projects will pick a combination of two mood boards. So they might like fonts on one, colors on another. And so then we'll refine that final visual identity. Here's a different example of visual identity and style guide combined into one. So you can see here, this is the critical success factors project that we mentioned earlier. And you can see that this is the layout. We've got our color palette hex codes. We've got our fonts, just like we mentioned a moment ago. One of the things that I like about this, and Kevin Rucker actually put this together, he did the design on this, and you can see that he even goes into the detail about what the buttons should look like. So very much like a style guide. What is our button design? How big should a button be? How big should a small button be, right? And this goes on. There are actually about 6 pages of this that have this in the design. This was created in InDesign. And so, or no, I'm sorry, it was Adobe Illustrator. So these are going to be, it's going to be a combination of the two, but it gives you the ability to put together your visual identity, your mood board, and your style guide together for your project, which is a really important part of designing consistently in your organization. If you do not have a style guide, you need one. And this is what makes the difference between me looking at one course and it working completely different in the next course. You want to have a consistent style guide so that it is very clear how people use your content. And that it's, if every single course you make is completely different, that can get confusing for your learners. The exceptions to that is if I have a special leadership training or I have a special tool like this, that can become a very good use case for where I would make a unique identity. But you should always look at your style guides for your courses and make sure that you're using a consistent approach to the way that they act, the interactions. Now we're to the end part here. We're in our prototyping phase, and I get to share with you one of my most favorite tools. Our prototype is an early model. So it is before we develop this project. This is what we share with our stakeholder to test out our design choices. So rather than lobbing over that storyboard that I showed you earlier, we can use that storyboard, create a quick prototype, and then share that with our client and say, okay, all of those design decisions that you made, whether, pulling together the content, our visual identity, our sketches, our layouts, how we want it to act. When I pull all that together, here's what we came up with. And it gives us that ability to test out our design decisions before we get into the development piece. My most favorite tool for this is called Pop, and it's prototyping on paper. You can get to it from Marvel app. Marvel is a company that bought this application a while back, but I will share with you, I have been using this for, at least since 2013. It may have been a little bit longer, but this is a fantastic application. The nice thing about this is that, one, you can actually prototype directly from your phone, whether you're on Android or Apple. So you can take pictures of, let's say you sketch something out, you can take pictures of it, or you can upload photos to your phone if you've sketched them out on your iPad or, on your desktop or in Paint. Is Paint even still around for my Microsoft people? I'm a Mac user, so I don't know, but it doesn't matter what you sketch it out in. You've drawn it somewhere, you can import those photos into this tool. And then what you can do is you can create hotspots that let someone actually tap through it. It's called a tappable or clickable prototype. And this gives us the opportunity to test out our design decisions. And one of my favorite ways to use this is in client meetings. So sometimes you will have a client or a stakeholder, SME, someone says, well, what if we just do this? And it's something that sounds completely ridiculous, right? It's put this button here and then it'll pop up and do whatever thing. So what I'll do is in those meetings, I'll just sketch it out on a piece of paper or a whiteboard, and I'll prototype it real quick and say, okay, let me show you what that will do, what that's going to look like if we do this. And sometimes I'm wrong, right? And so, we sketch that out, we prototype it, and we see what is, is this decision one that we want to make, and incorporate into our project. So that's prototyping on paper. It is very, very simple to use. If you go out to our website, I'm pretty sure there's a recording somewhere of me teaching this tool at some point, but quite frankly, you can go out and download it and figure out how to use it in a couple minutes. It is also on your desktop. So you can use the desktop version as well, and you can share your prototype with people through a link, and they do not have to have the application. They can open it in their browser and test it either on their phone or on their desktop. And it's free up to a certain number of projects. I've never paid for it. And so it's very robust, even just for the free version. It is definitely enterprise ready. So it is a really great tool to use. Another tool that I've used in the past is called Envision App. And this works very similar to Pop App. I feel that it has a little less features on the rapid side and is maybe a little more robust on the implementation side. So if you were building maybe, say, a mobile application, this might serve you better. I mean, I've used Pop App to create design prototypes for mobile applications, but this is another tool that you could take a look at and see if that meets your requirements. And this is one that's become very popular more recently, and this is Adobe XD, Adobe Experience Design. And you can basically follow the same principles that we just talked about with the previous two prototyping tools. I will say that this tool tends to be more design heavy. So for those of you who are doing a lot more in visual design, and if you're used to using Adobe tools, then this is probably going to be a tool that you want to try out. It also, from what I understand, I don't think that you have to pay for the license, but if you have an Adobe Creative Cloud account, you definitely have access to it. So another tool that you may want to check out. Now, I do get people that ask me, can't I just create a prototype in the tools that I'm using to develop it? And I'm going to say yes, and so here are some really common tools, right? These tend to be the big tools right now. You've got your Articulate tools, you've got your Captivate tools, and then Adapt is one that is a framework that a lot of tools are using as the underlying platform. It's an open source platform that is to develop content for multiple screens. Think about Articulate Rise, but with every single option that you can imagine, that's Adapt. And so if we look at these tools, could I create a prototype in these tools and share it? Yes, absolutely. Especially like Articulate 360 as a review tool, I could create a prototype. Why I don't do that is that what I find, if I get in one of these tools and try to create a prototype, I end up developing too much. And it takes me too much time because I end up wanting to make everything perfect. And I want to make it function the way that it's going to, when you're in development mode, you're going to develop. And I think that I know that I definitely save a lot of time by prototyping in a rapid prototyping tool rather than prototyping in the tool that I'm going to use. There are just too many little tweaks and settings that you'll get into just because you're used to it. So I would recommend not going down this path. But if you really, really want to, you can try it out and see if it works for you. So we will end our session today with a question. And it can be rhetorical if you want. But if you'd like to share in the chat, what's one thing that we covered today that you feel that you could immediately take away and implement into your own design process now? What's something that you would want to take back and incorporate in your design process? So if you would like to share one in the chat, I'll let you guys take a moment, think about what we covered today. What's one thing that you might implement in your design process? Would it be mood boards, content mapping? Maybe it's creating prototypes. Maybe it's creating sketches and wireframes. Maybe it's all of it. So what are the things that you would implement now? And while you're thinking on that, as far as typing that in the chat, one thing that I did want to share is one of the most frequently asked questions that I get when I teach this session is, how is this going to impact the amount of time it takes for me to create a course? And I will share with you that this has proven to me that it is much more efficient and faster if you follow these steps than if you go the traditional storyboard approach. The reason for that is that we're spending a lot of time in design, and development goes extremely quickly because you've already tested it out. You've already made those decisions. There are very, very few revisions in the development phase. If you don't follow these steps, that's when you end up with 35 development files, and it's like, project.final.6.version 8 because we end up having to develop it 8,000 times because all of those design decisions are getting incorporated into the development process. And so it's always funny to me where people are like, well, this is going to take a lot of time to design this. But here are the benefits from it. One, a lot less development time. Your SMEs, your stakeholders, you will be far less frustrated. You're going to end up with a much better product. And you know exactly what you want to evaluate. You know exactly what to look for in beta testing. You have a much better understanding of your project because you've planned that out on the front end, which is what we're supposed to be doing, right? So put these in process. I noticed that some of the comments that I've seen is, the sneak peek it templates, using the mood board. Those are all things that we can implement right away. Some of these steps are going to require a much more in-depth change process. So, take what you can from this presentation. I would love to hear from you if you have feedback or share your experiences in using this process. Again, here's my contact information. And thank you all for having me today.
Thank you, Sarah. That was a wonderful presentation, and I learned quite a bit about instructional design myself. And I think I love the fact that you shared so many of the tools that you use, so that people can go back and go, oh, this is a tool that I hadn't thought about, or this would help make my life a little bit easier. Sure. So we'll definitely make sure that we continue to include that in the comments below. I'll share it on our social media channels as well, a list of the tools that you have recommended. And as always, this video will remain here on our Facebook page and will be imported over to our YouTube channel as well for easy access, so folks can continue to watch your video and learn from all of your experience and your insights. It was a really great presentation, and I can't tell you enough how much we appreciate you being here today with us to share this.
Of course. Thank you all for having me.
Absolutely. And so again, if you guys are watching the replay, if you have any comments or questions, feel free to drop it into the comments below, and we will make sure that Sarah will get back to you if there's a need for a response. And then we will be back shortly in about half an hour with one of your friends, Sarah, JD Dillon, talking about getting started with AI and L&D. So that is going to be a really great topic as well. So thanks everyone for joining us. We appreciate all the comments. Thanks Tracy for joining us and tuning in today as well. And we'll see you here shortly.
Thanks everyone.
Bye.